The reading is taken from Luke chapter 24, verses 13 to 35. Now on that same day, 2 of the disciples were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead, as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. Thanks be to God.
We had hoped. This passage is one that is acted out by Christians on a regular basis, often without realising it. It's the passage on which the liturgy for Holy Communion is based. We greet Jesus on the road of our lives, not quite recognising him. We confess to him our sadness, the mess that we've made of our life of faith and hope. Our hearts burn within us as he opens the scriptures to us. We intercede with him to stay with us a little longer. And finally we meet him in the breaking of the bread and run out to tell the world what has happened on the road of our lives and how Jesus has been made known to us. As I mentioned on Holy Saturday, this is the first time in Luke's Gospel that we actually meet the resurrected Jesus. Prior to this, we've only encountered the empty tomb and a confusing second-hand tale, nothing very credible. As always, Luke, the canny old doctor, presents us with this story because he believes that the characters in it somehow represent us. So Who are you in the story? Maybe for you the whole Christian faith still feels a little like a confusing second-hand tale, nothing very credible. Or perhaps you identify with the disciples in the early stages of the story, summed up in the words, "But we had hoped." At the moment, there are so many hopes and dreams lying in tatters, aren't there? People have lost jobs, missed opportunities. We're missing much-loved events in the calendar, sporting fixtures, village events, church festivals. Speaking personally, I begin to feel itchy at the thought of life passing me by. I don't know what I'm missing exactly, except that life has kind of stalled, and I could really do with a haircut. Yet none of these remotely compares with those who've lost loved ones or whose lives have been permanently scarred by coronavirus. And even those of us who've not been hurt by it yet have to face the imminent possibility of our own mortality, particularly those heroes working in the NHS, or in the front line of social care, or in the low-paid jobs that keep our shop shelves stacked and our essential supplies supplied. Right now, we all have to face the imminent reality that life could end or change permanently. But we had hoped. And I guess what this reminds us is an old truth set out in the scriptures, that all the glory of man passes that like the grass of the fields. In the end, everything we hope for in this world is only temporary. It can only be temporary. It must fade and fall away sooner or later. The best we can hope for is that it might be later, once we've had a chance to enjoy it. But as many older folk know, when their friendship circle diminishes and the world they inhabited dies away, it is still a very hard thing to bear when our hopes and dreams pass away. But as the Bible reassures us, although all the glory of man passes away, the word of the Lord endures forever, and his mercy is everlasting. And this journey on the road to Emmaus demands that we look at hope with the fresh eyes and set our hope somewhere different, somewhere more permanent, somewhere more reliable. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel, the disciples explain to Jesus when they're explaining their disappointed hopes in Jesus. And yet, that's exactly who Jesus was. He was the one to redeem Israel. The thing that they were most hoping for had in fact come true, just not in the way that they had expected. They had the right hopes and dreams, but they'd set them in the wrong places. In fact, what they most deeply hoped for had come true in the death and resurrection of Jesus. And on that road, Jesus shows them that everything they'd hoped for and the way in which it had been fulfilled had all been set out for them in the scriptures. The light they needed in their darkness and on their dark journey was all there for them in the Bible, if only they'd read it and understood it. But they had just been too foolish and slow of heart to believe. I don't know about you, but that's true of me. I know my scriptures fairly well, as you might expect from someone who studies them daily. And yet every time I read them, I'm surprised by something I hadn't spotted before, or something that hadn't quite clicked or fallen into place. And that's because I am foolish and slow of heart to believe. I mentioned in Holy Week that we tend to think of faith as something that sends people off the rails if they get too enthusiastic about it. Rational people are better off keeping their faith in moderation, holding God at arm's length and not getting too close to it all. But Jesus is urging us to rethink that assumption, keeping our faith in moderation. Holding God at arm's length and leaving our Bibles gathering dust on the shelves means that we're missing the light that God is giving us for our path, and the ways in which God is trying to draw our attention to the fact that he has already given us that which we most hope for. Keeping God at arm's length in our lives just leaves us hoping in things that can only fade away, feeling, but we had hoped. When all along, Jesus is walking the road of our lives with us, pointing to the miracles he's already done for us, which are right in front of our noses, but which we didn't spot because we were lost in our sadness and in our tattered hopes and dreams? The answer for Cleopas and his companion, and for me and you, is to keep walking the road with Jesus, letting him unfold the scriptures for us, meeting him in the bread and wine, and travelling the road together with other disciples. You know, in some ways, these days of isolation are quite special. Many of us have time for new things. Not least, you can now go to church from the comfort of your own homes at a time that suits you. And for me, our YouTube channel has given me a vastly bigger congregation than I would normally have on a Sunday. That's all great. It's a gift from God. But in the end, there's no substitute for actually meeting together on the road of our lives, sharing our hopes and dreams with each other and with Jesus, sharing our disappointments and sadnesses, telling Jesus about them together, of unfolding the scriptures together, letting our hearts burn within us as we do so, and in meeting Jesus in the breaking of the bread, before running out to tell everyone that we too have met the risen Jesus. So, going back to where I began, where are you in this story? Are you one of those left distraught by what you had hoped for? If so, how might Jesus be asking you to look at life differently and see the miracles he's already set before you? How might he be calling you to fix your hopes and dreams in something better, something more valuable, something that really endures forever? And maybe to see that he has already fulfilled everything that you deeply hope for. Or are you one of those for whom faith still feels like a confusing second-hand tale, nothing very credible? If so, you too can meet the risen Jesus on the road of your life. He's actually been walking with you all this time, but our eyes don't always recognise him, so they have to be attuned to it. Meeting him is actually incredibly simple because he's already there. We simply have to let his word into our hearts until it clicks and starts to burn within us and we begin to recognise Jesus. We simply have to ask him to stay with us and reveal himself to us. And then be patient and keep watching. And each of us can meet the risen Jesus on the road and discover that everything we most deeply hope for has already been given to us in the death and resurrection of Jesus. We should never be afraid to go deeper with Jesus, because it is nothing less than the road that leads from despair to hope. Endless, glorious hope.